I'm the Philosophical Bachelor, and today I'm going to continue on Chapter 3 of my Metaphysical investigations on life. From randomness can come order, the order we find in our world. But as Charles Sanders Peirce observes, randomness does not disappear from the scene after initiating the Big Bang. There is no reason to think that all randomness was exhausted, used up in one fell swoop at the opening act of our world, after which all is determined. Virtual particles continue to manifest in all spaces due to random quantum field fluctuations, but their effects are swarmed in worlds with things by the far greater forces of macroscopic entities such as gravity and mechanical forces. We have discussed how worlds can come into being and the role randomness plays in bringing them about. The broad strokes of how we got from the initial conditions of nothing or something to worlds of things are now in place, but we have yet to explain how from a world of things that is in the sweet zone, living things can emerge. Does randomness have a role there also? Toss 10 dice together enough times and you can get them to come up all sixes on the same throw. Do so enough times and you can even get them to come up all sixes 10 times in a row. The odds are low but not zero. So long as an event is not impossible, it remains possible. However, just because it is possible does not mean it has already happened. It does mean though that it can yet happen, and given an infinite universe, it means it will happen at some point or other. This brings us to our fourth principle. If it is possible, it will happen sooner or later somewhere in the universe. Is it possible that life can arise abiogenetically, meaning from non-living things? If abiogenesis is impossible, then living things can only come from other living things, which makes life as basic as non-life or the inanimate. A variant of the biogenetic approach is panpsychism, where everything, even inanimate matter, is in fact just dominant forms of consciousness and hence is already alive. However, abiogenesis is a promising theory, with scientific discoveries indicating potential pathways from inorganic molecules to organic ones and finally to biological cells. Even for planets that fall into the sweet zone, life must still somehow emerge from their dead soils or waters or be transported there. On the latter, chemical analysis of meteoroids originating from Mars indicate the presence of organic molecules, compounds containing carbon, which are precursors of living matter. The idea that life originated elsewhere and was transported to Earth via astronomical bodies like meteoroids, asteroids, comets, or planetoids is known as panspermia. On the former, Stanley Miller and Harold Urey conducted experiments in 1953, applying energy in the form of electrical discharges simulating lightning to a mixture meant to resemble primordial Earth. This mixture comprised simple inorganic compounds such as methane, ammonia, hydrogen, and water vapor. Lo and behold, after some time, amino acids were formed. Amino acids are vital building blocks to living matter. According to the RNA world hypothesis, further chemical reactions that complexify the initial products can synthesize ribonucleic acids. Some types of RNA can auto-catalyze further reactions, self-replicate, and transmit its own genetic information, giving them a reproductive advantage over the RNA that cannot. The former RNA becomes the basis for the formation of protobions and protocells. Another hypothesis is metabolism first, where the driving impetus of chemical reactions is to lower the energy of its products relative to its reactants in a bid for increased stability. One such exothermic reaction is carbon dioxide with hydrogen, which produces water, acetate, and heat and light energy. Hydrogen has an energetic electron, making it unstable and hence a source of chemical energy. This reductive process creates a more complex but more stable molecule, an acetate with 2 carbon atoms. This acetate is an ingredient to make the essential oils of cell membranes. For both hypotheses, since there is no life yet, there is a fortiori no intelligent life. Both theories do not require intelligent agents to plan and then make their chemical reactions occur. When these reactions do happen, they are an outcome of coinciding fortuitous events. Given the complexity of such processes, it is not a surprise that the emergence of life took a long time. The oldest fossilized microorganisms we have discovered, which were possibly the first life forms, are 3.77 to 4.28 billion years old, about 10 billion years younger than the Big Bang event, and a few 100 million years younger than the formation of the Earth, which is 4.5 billion years old. Randomness, given the mathematics of infinity, guarantees that if life is possible, then it will at some point emerge, but it cannot tell us when. It may take an extremely long time. The more conditions that need to be met and the more sequential steps a process requires, the longer will be the time required, since the probability will correspondingly be slimmer with each additional condition and step. Nonetheless, despite all the various scientific theories and experiments, protobions and protocells have not yet been synthesized in the laboratory. Neither has the transition from non-living to living things been observed or synthesized. Experimental efforts are ongoing, from approaches such as creating artificial cells to work trying to understand the chemistry of prebiotic processes, but abiogenesis, while promising, remains unproven. Panspermia may further complicate matters, since it is difficult firstly to even know and then subsequently replicate conditions on alien planets that have the potential to generate life. But scientific work is also nonetheless being carried out in that direction, for instance in astrobiology. One possibility is that the environment elsewhere, say Mars or interstellar dust clouds, may be conducive to creating precursors to life, but not life itself. Through collision with Mars or interstellar winds moving the dust clouds, this precursor material is then scattered throughout the solar system and beyond, like so many dandelion papuses, trying to find a place with suitable conditions that will enable it to take the next step towards the formation of proto-life. All this brings us to our fifth principle. From the inanimate can come life. In this way, abiogenesis as a process is a continuation of the random accidents of the universe, a brute force approach with many trials taking place across the universe's infinite spatial and temporal expanse, some of which will result in molecular configurations that lead to life. It is a multi-stage process. While the initial stages are random, subsequent stages can be self-selecting, leading to a self-amplification of effects such as in the autocatalytic RNA world hypothesis. Once self-replication begins, Darwinian natural selection from better adaptation of random mutations to the environment, and then the transmission of such genetic advantages through reproduction, continues the process of evolution. Evolution is the descent, with modification from a common ancestor, which takes place due to a change in heritable information transmitted through the generations. Four mechanisms are central to genetic evolution: mutation, migration, genetic drift, and natural selection. Chance or randomness plays a major role in each of the first three mechanisms. Randomness is amoral. Thus, as a random process, genetic mutations may turn out to be beneficial, harmful, or neutral to its organism. Mutations happen naturally when DNA spontaneously breaks down or does not copy accurately by accident during cell division. Exposure to certain chemicals and radiation can also cause mutations. Some such exposures are likewise accidental or at least unintended, while some may be malicious, such as with Schrodinger's cat. Gene flow through migration takes place when individual members of a species move to a different population. Its causes can be accidental, such as when pollen of flowers is blown by wind to wherever, or it could be intentional, such as human beings migrating for economic or political reasons. Genetic drift has even more to do with randomness. Some individuals have more descendants than others due to chance occurrences. For instance, if the others die through accident before reproducing, or if a particular flower's pollen lands on unsuitable ground while another lands on fertile soil. All these lead to genetic variations. After the events of genetic variation, chance or otherwise, natural selection through reproductive fitness comes into play. Reproductive fitness requires firstly the survival of the reproducing individual. If the individual does not reproduce before dying, it will not transmit any inheritable adaptation. Advantageous adaptations include adaptations to the environment, for instance, adaptations that improve resistance to the climate, such as fur for animals in cold climates, or camouflage for animals to avoid predators. Secondly, reproductive fitness involves sexual selection, where a surviving individual is able to successfully find a sexual partner. For instance, the development of colorful tails in male peacocks to better attract a mate. Sex also generates genetic variation through the shuffling of genes with one's mate in conception, which is a function of sexual selection and chance. Hence, randomness continues to play a role in the evolutionary process, making it still a process of trial and error, with reproductive fitness as the criterion of success, leading to increasingly reproductively fitter progeny over many generations. This process is intra-species and hence is considered as small-scale evolution. We should also examine large-scale evolution, which is speciation from a shared ancestor. The tremendous diversity of species we observe today is a result of large-scale evolution. Geographic isolation of a population of a species is one cause of speciation. It may be caused by a changing physical landscape, such as the change of course of rivers, rising mountains, or continental drift, resulting in the division of a population into several smaller populations. The new habitats may then introduce different selective pressures, which may favor different physical characteristics. For instance, in the original landscape, whether a beetle is green or brown may render no advantage. But if the new landscape is full of greenery, then being green may be a form of camouflage, helping green beetles survive better against predators, while if it was full of wood or marsh, being brown may be better. Over generations, such factors change the gene frequency, which may lead to the emergence of a completely different species. What distinguishes between species is their inability to interbreed. If the green beetles across the river are no longer able to interbreed with the ones on the other side, they have become a new species. They are then also reproductively isolated such that even if the physical barrier disappears, like if the river dries up or changes course once again, allowing the reunion of the two populations, the two groups of beetles, now two different species, will no longer be able to produce viable offspring, or they will simply avoid mating with each other. Such isolation may be chance occurrences. They can also arise from human actions such as the damming of rivers or the construction of buildings that end up separating a population of a species. But let us take it for now that we have not got to that part of the history of the world when human beings come on the scene. In this state of nature, chance still plays a big role, though its effects are already diminished from the chaos that characterized the early world, since plants and animals already possess rudimentary or low-level consciousnesses. Their intentions now play a significant role, leading to a reduced role for randomness. Over several billion years, the many cycles of generation as well as extinction come to produce a complex, multi-branched tree of life or phylogeny. By examining this phylogeny, we can learn the ancestry of each species. It is a tree and not a ladder where more advanced species evolve from less advanced ones. Even the best thinkers like Hans Jonas, who lived in the 20th century, committed that conceptual error. Instead, all the different species alive at any one time took the same amount of time to evolve to their present state from a common ancestor known as the last universal common ancestor or Luca. Homo sapiens as well as moss and bacteria all trace back to Luca. Luca's descendants had split into different lineages over some 4 billion years, which brought them on different evolutionary paths leading to their current state. Let us consider how some people in ancient times understood the human species. The ancient Greeks tell us that the gods, after creating all manners of mortal creatures, had instructed two brothers, Prometheus and Epimetheus, to distribute capabilities to the animals in order that they might be able to survive. Epimetheus persuaded Prometheus to allow him to do the work alone. Despite being feeble-minded, he wisely dished out capabilities to the different species in a balanced way, providing some with strength but not speed, while those which were weak were given speed. Some were given fur, or tough hides, depending on their need for protection against the environment. Some lived underground, while some above ground. Some had hooves, while some had claws. Some produced many offspring, while some had few, each according to its need. However, when it came to the human being's turn, Epimetheus realized he had already dished out all the capabilities on hand, with nothing left for humankind. Plato notes in his dialogue Protagoras, Prometheus came to check the distribution of capabilities and saw that while the rest of the living animals had their proper share of everything, humankind remained naked and unshod, without bidding and protection. In order that humankind could survive, Prometheus stole fire from the gods. Fire is a prerequisite for the ability to fabricate tools, and hence set humankind on the path of techne, or practical knowledge. This was an act of benevolence to humankind by an act of treason to the gods, for which Zeus condemned Prometheus to be chained by unbreakable bonds to the side of a cliff, where a vulture would eat his liver by day only for it to grow back at night, just so that it could be attacked again the following day for all eternity. While the myth is only a story, the fact remains that because human beings lack the physical capabilities of animals to fend for ourselves, we have to make up for this lack through the use of our intellect to figure out how to find food, shelter, and protection from predators as well as the environment. Because we lack claws or sharp teeth, we had to develop tools to hunt. We had to think. An early hominid, which scientists named Lucy, came into existence 4 million years ago, but Homo sapiens only emerged 315,000 years ago. We do not know when spoken language began, since no records were possible before the advent of writing, though we have discovered drawings such as geometric etching on rocks in the Blombos caves of South Africa, which date back between 75,000 to 100,000 years. Sulawesi, Indonesia, has the world's oldest cave paintings, which were made around 51,200 years ago. If we consider such drawings as primitive signs of intellectual consciousness in Homo sapiens, it took over 200,000 years to emerge. Still, that seems quick compared to the 4 billion years between the first forms of life and Lucy, and then millions more for Lucy to evolve to become Homo sapiens. The story of the universe so far has centered on randomness, but with the emergence of primitive plant and animal consciousness, the role of chance has been reduced. Natural selection and the role chance plays in it through genetic variation, alongside randomness in general, are still present today and will always be present. However, just like with virtual particles after the formation of entities, its effects are to a large extent diminished, though never altogether extinguished. Once human intellectual consciousness enters the picture, selection by human choice became for some species the key factor for what traits persist in their lineage. By only allowing certain strains of plants and animals to reproduce, farmers and animal breeders caused selected breeds to become more common than would otherwise have been the case. Examples include cauliflower and broccoli, both types of the mustard plant, as well as domestic animals like dogs, where new breeds such as Great Danes and Chihuahuas have been created by human selective breeding. Conscious selection by intelligent agents is intentional and has aims, such as to breed more resilient crops or cuter pets, while natural selection is by contrast mindless and mechanistic. Natural selection does not strive for progress, balance, or any goals for that matter, simply being a result of variation, differential reproduction, and heredity. To be able to choose implies firstly that there exist choices, and secondly ways to choose between them. The ability to make choices is not unique to human beings. As already pointed out, peacocks decide which male to mate with. The preference for a more colourful tail means that peacocks somehow value that over a duller tail. Dogs, when presented with two different types of food, may be more attracted to one than the other. Yet arguably, these value systems may be more a matter of instinct than intellect. Bergson posits that all living things have consciousness. However, the degree of how conscious these consciousnesses is the organism's balance between instinct and intellect. What determine this balance are the choices that confront each species. Plants are firmly rooted to a spot, transforming the minerals from the soil and whatever light and water fall on it into its food and from there its body. The lack of mobility means that whatever spot its seeds land on will determine the fate of its progeny. Even plants, according to Bergson, have intellect, but because they have hardly any choices to make, their intellect becomes dormant. However, according to Hans Jonas, this lack of mobility also means that they have little risk of making mistakes. Plants have environment while animals have world. This brings us to a sixth principle. Life is tied to consciousness, of which there are degrees. Animals are mobile. They have to decide where to go to find food and water in order to survive. More choices mean that they need to use their intellects more. They have to be able to perceive their surroundings, desire their object, move towards it, and then act to gain it. Most animals, however, are still largely driven by their instincts. While an animal is hungry, its appetite drives it to go hunt or to feed. Once this appetite is sated, it stops. Go in the wrong direction and it may have to go hungry or be hunted down, resulting in injury and possibly death. The ability to choose comes with a cost, which is the risk of choosing wrongly. Jonas proposes that these possibilities of correct-incorrect, of success-failure, give rise to sensations of pleasure and pain, which cause values to emerge in animals. Positive values are attributed to what they desire. What is desired is what, when attained, is expected to give pleasure, while negative values are attributed to what repulses them, which attainment is expected to bring pain. These expectations are conditioned by experiences. The ability to perceive one's surrounding through one's sensory apparatus is what enables an animal to actively seek to satisfy its values. This brings us to the seventh principle. Sensations lead to the formation of values. Animals use their senses to pick out their objects of desire from among other objects, be it through their vision, hearing, smell, touch, taste, or an integrated map combining their sensory perceptions. In a higher animal such as the human being, vision goes beyond sight into imagination, allowing us to represent absent objects as mental ideas. The pain and pleasure that previously came from actual experiences with a target object informs our idea of the object. If one has been hurt by fire previously, the mere idea of fire may arouse a painful emotion. This emotion is subjective, personal, since pain is not present in fire itself. For others, fire can, on the contrary, be a source of a comforting emotion, for instance, if they associate it with warmth and light. From the ability to imagine or ideate external objects then comes the ability to manipulate these ideas mentally as symbols, that is, to think about things conceptually. With the ideation of external objects comes also the ability to direct these mental gaze inwards, to mentally represent one's own self and similarly mentally manipulate this idea of our person in relation to other ideas. That is, to think about things in relation to one's self. We thus become self-aware. Not all animals can mentally visualize themselves as an object among other objects. One sign of this is when they fail to recognize themselves in a mirror. Baboons, cats, dogs, monkeys, and even young children fail the mirror test, while dolphins, elephants, and certain birds like magpies pass it. However, ideas and the actual objects of our ideas may not match up to each other. Our mental image of the Eiffel Tower may meet, exceed, or fall short of an actual visual perception of the tower. Likewise, our mental idea of ourselves may meet, exceed, or fall short of who we actually are. We may fail to be objective, imagining ourselves to be courageous, only to find out that we are cowardly when confronted with difficult situations. We may, however, aspire to then improve, to not just be courageous in our imagination, but in actuality. Such thoughts cause us to question who we are and who we want to be. As our thinking ability ascends, we start to wonder about meaning, including the meaning of our own existence and our relation to the world. These questions gain cogency because we live not just by ourselves, for ourselves, but with other people and things. We affect others and in turn are affected by them. Our self-awareness paves the way for us to become self-reflective. Realizing our impact, we realize we have to be responsible. Our consciousness gains a conscience. Because we have a conscience and because we live together with other people and things, we need an ethics. Bergson's philosophy of life tallies well with Jonas's. As discussed, Bergson places species of living things on a spectrum with instinct and intellect at either ends. We have already talked about plants which are completely dominated by instinct with no need for intellect due to their lack of mobility. Further on, but still on the instinct-heavy end of the spectrum, are animals like bees and ants which live in colonies. While each member is an individual distinct from the others, they each have a specific role in service of the hive. They do require some intellect in order to carry out their roles well, but this intellect is in service to their instincts. Too much intellect and its associated demand for freedom would doom them, since apart from the hive, they are unable to survive. On the other hand, if a bee or an ant has to perish so as to preserve its hive, it will do so instinctively and hence without hesitation. Their instincts direct their actions, and they do not possess the intellectual capacity to recognize and hence resent this limitation on their freedom. Human beings are animals on the other end of the spectrum. We do still have some instincts. For instance, adrenaline kicks in automatically when we sense danger. For many other situations, however, we depend more on our intellect in order to understand, reason, and decide what to do. Liberty and agency are necessary accompaniments of intellect, since it will be pointless to be able to think about possible actions without the possibility for deciding and then carrying them out. The bees and ants themselves are the tools of their colony, while human beings use their intelligence to develop tools in order to preserve and improve our lives, according to Bergson. We are Homo sapiens, the intelligent man. We use our intelligence to fabricate tools, making us also Homo faber, or man, the maker. We take responsibility and have a conscience, making us ethical and moral beings. In transcending ourselves, we become spiritual beings. Let us take stock of the adventure of the universe thus far. When there was nothing, when space was just a void, randomness was the force that brought physical entities into existence through quantum field fluctuations, leading to worlds of things. In these worlds of things, mechanical forces then took the fall, relegating randomness to the background. As inorganic molecules in some of these worlds complexified first to organic molecules and then to the substance of life, biological forces such as evolutionary natural selection, metabolism, and reproduction come into play, but even these biological forces need the material of genetic and environmental random variations to act on. While living things generate their own energy and exert their own forces, they still remain things which rely on and are acted on by mechanical forces such as gravity and action and reaction pairs. This brings us to our eighth principle. As the universe develops, new forces play a more significant role, though the older forces remain active. As life speciates, the diversity in species is reflected in the diversity of their degrees of consciousness, falling along a spectrum balancing between instinct and intellect. Where these degrees of consciousness land on this spectrum are driven by their species' biological needs. The immobile, such as plants, rely on their adjacent surroundings, and instinct-heavy animals, such as bees and ants, rely on strictly structured social systems. They hence have little use for intellect. On the intellect-heavy end of the spectrum are human beings. Intellect goes together with freedom and agency, since the power to be able to reason and yet be unable to act according to one's reason will be self-defeating. To have freedom is to not be determined. A true choice is, however, not random either. If our choices were purely random, then it is also not freedom, not intentional acts of agency. Some degrees of indetermination leading to unpredictability in our choices is required. Randomness in nature breaks the chain of mechanical determination, but merely paves the way for agency to arise. C. A. Campbell observes that free will seems to violate the principle of cause and effect when viewed from the outside, but not from the inside, since the agent feels within himself that he is the cause of his decisions. With intelligence comes self-awareness and self-reflection. Add in free will and the human consciousness gains agency to direct its actions. Agency accompanied by a sense of responsibility that goes beyond self-preservation to a responsibility for other people and things, or writ large for the world, gives rise to conscience. Evolutionary biology has enabled nature to produce intelligent species. Intellect is not the exclusive hallmark of humankind. Animals also exhibit intelligent behavior and responses, and as noted, some species have self-awareness, recognizing themselves in a mirror. According to Max Scheler, there are still higher states of consciousness. He can agree with Bergson that all living things have consciousness, but Scheller will call these lower states of consciousness psyche. Scheller thinks that human beings are the epitome of living things because we possess something the rest do not, which is spirit. Spirit is a culmination of the development of nature. It shares a boundary with psyche in the use of reason to think ideas, but in addition includes intuition of essences, volition, and emotions leading to actions such as kindness, love, repentance, or states of wonder, bliss, despair, and free decision-making. Spirit transcends the materiality of atomic, physical, and biological interactions, and is not a continuation of these material processes. Scheller's account predates Jonas's, though it is after Bergson's, and they all share many points of agreement. Through the ability to first see present objects and then represent them in absentia, we can distance ourselves physically and mentally from things and even ourselves, allowing us to achieve objectivity and self-consciousness. While we, like animals, have drives such as hunger compelling us to find food and sexual urges to have sex, we, unlike animals, are able to resist them. As Jonas has explained, pleasure and pain from the satisfaction of one's instinct or drives lead to the formation of values. When presented with food, animals when hungry are unable to stop themselves from eating. Food is good and starvation is bad as far as animals are concerned. Our animal side will agree with this assessment, but our spiritual side may not. Our spirit is able to turn aside from sensual contents, for instance by closing our eyes, shrinking from touches, holding our noses, closing our mouths, plugging our ears, and most importantly, controlling our thoughts. In addition, we devise ways to substitute or overwhelm sensual contents with other sensual contents, for instance through the use of perfumes to mask body odor, or with music to drown out ambient noise. We can also refuse our drives and instincts, going beyond the utilitarian calculus of pleasure and pain, to pursue what we deem to be more important, even if it brings more pain than pleasure. For instance, during a hunger strike, we refuse food and water, even if our bodily drives tell us that we are starving and thirsty, choosing to suffer in order to demonstrate our commitment to our ideological beliefs. We can and often refuse our sexual drive because of social or religious mores or personal convictions, such as to preserve one's virginity for a future partner or to have a monogamous relationship, even though our reproductive instinct may tell us to sow our seeds widely. It is a spiritual quest for the meaning of our personal existence. This brings us to our ninth principle. Multiple values lead to a need to prioritize competing values, leading to a spiritual quest for the meaning of our personal existence. Scheller proposes that because spirit is immaterial, it has no power or energy of its own. For it to influence action, it has to find energy. By refusing or repressing our physical drives, the energy that would have been consumed in the fulfillment of these drives can then be redirected by our spirit towards spiritual activities, such as penetrating true appearances to the essence of things, spiritual purification, or love. This leads to our 10th principle. The transcendence by human beings of their physical drives gives birth to spirit. Scheller posits that spirit is fundamental in nature and is irreducible to anything else, supposedly more fundamental than it. One way to understand this is that he is a vitalist or a panpsychist who thinks that spirit is primitive, latent in everything, though it can only surface after the candidate possesses a sufficiently high degree of consciousness, such that he is able to be conscious of himself and refuse his drives to go beyond his physical nature in order to awaken his spiritual side. Vitalism and panpsychism are two theories to account for spirit in living things. Vitalism tells us that a vital or life-giving force is fundamental in the universe and it is this force that infuses life and its associate, spirit, into living things. A theistic reading of vitalism is possible, though that may presume a teleology, which, as Bergson's vitalism demonstrates, is not necessarily needed. Panpsychism is the theory that everything, including inanimate objects, all have life and consciousness in them, though they may be dormant. Both these theories posit that life is primitive, as basic as the non-living things in the universe, while panpsychism in addition posits that consciousness is also primitive. However, as far as we know, life did not emerge until around 10 billion years after the Big Bang, which casts doubt on vitalism. Panpsychism's answer to that criticism will be that all is alive. Even the virtual particles in ancient T minors that I proposed could be the beginnings of matter or whatever particles were in the Big Bang singularity. Panpsychism's strength is, however, also its weakness. It seems to be able to explain how the current state of affairs includes conscious living things, but it is also self-refuting. If everything is alive and conscious, then nothing is alive and conscious, since the categories of life and consciousness no longer have any epistemic significance, as they make no distinctions among the diversity of entities. A developmental account of life and consciousness seems to be able to overcome these difficulties. It does not posit that life and consciousness were already there from T0 or earlier the way vitalism and panpsychism seem to. Neither does it suffer from panpsychism's extravagance, which posit that everything existent is alive and conscious. Nonetheless, a successful theory cannot just be negative, but needs to not only provide a positive explanation of how things developed to be the way they currently are, but also be able to predict future development. It should be grounded in a metaphysics that corresponds to our best science. The theory of emergence may be able to meet these requirements. This is chapter 3 of my metaphysical investigations, and you can tune in to chapter 4 on emergence next week. Thank you for listening to the Philosophical Bachelor.